How did they fake the video? Nichol dismisses the video because he said it was introduced to the public by Tom DeLonge's To the Stars. In other words, the video couldn't be real because Tom DeLonge's To the Stars was the one who introduced this. It wasn't CNN, wasn't MSNBC, and it wasn't Fox. It was not a traditional news source that produced it. Although the New York Times, a traditional news source, did run with the story some months ago. Okay? But again, because it was introduced by Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, they shoot the messenger. I mean, if Tom DeLonge says it, if Alex Jones says it, if To the Stars says it, it must be bullshit. That's the reasoning behind it. It's got to be BS because Tom DeLonge said so. Now, Tom DeLonge, Nichol calls DeLonge a former pop singer. Well, okay, well, you're wrong there because Angels and Airwaves, Tom DeLonge's band, just played in St. Louis this week, so he's not a former singer, so Mr. Nichol got that wrong. But consider Nichol and his background, okay? Nichol belittles Favor, saying he was just the butt of a joke, and he just thinks he saw what he saw. He doesn't address the video because he said it was introduced by Tom DeLonge, okay? Now, Nichol's a smart guy. He has a PhD. And say what you will about academics, but if you have a PhD, you're not a dummy. It takes a lot of smarts to have a PhD. So he's going to go ahead and refute a bunch of theory from Navy guys because he has a PhD in what? Physics? Science? Astronomy? No. He has a PhD in English, not science. Also consider this. Nichol spent a lot of time in Canada. He did so because he left this country to avoid the draft. He didn't want to go to Vietnam. Now, I'm not judging Nichol, okay? I'm not saying it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but it was definitely a fact. I'm not judging him. But because he went to Canada instead of serving in the military, could Nichol have disdain for the U.S. military? Could he? I would say he could. I'm not saying he does. I'm saying he could. In other words, maybe that's his thing to call military people silly or making things up. Joe Nichol is also a debunker. He's a skeptic. He's one who always takes the same side. He doesn't say, hey, here's something here. Let's look at the facts and figure out what's going on. He sees something odd and says, okay, I'm going to debunk this now. I'm going to prove that you're wrong. Always. He takes that side. Like a lawyer who defends a client. A lawyer who defends his client is never going to tell the jury, I know this is my client, but after looking at the evidence, he's guilty. No, a lawyer's never going to do that. He takes this side. Like a pitcher. A pitcher always tries to strike out the batter. A pitcher never says, you know what, this one time I'm going to let him hit a home run. He never does that. He always tries to get the batter out. Every time. Like a politician who's trying to win an election. Is a politician ever going to say, you know what, considering everything, my opponent, he's probably a better guy for the job than me, so you need to vote for him. No, they never do that. They always decide on one solution, and they never consider something else. That's what Nichol's doing. He belittled Fravor as being an E.T. stooge. Now, I've read a whole lot about Fravor. I've heard a lot of it. I've listened to hours of interviews with Fravor. And not once has he ever said what he saw was an ET, or what he saw was an alien, or what he saw was a spacecraft of any sort. He never said any of that. All I've heard him say is that what he saw was something he couldn't explain. It wasn't this, it wasn't that, it wasn't that, it wasn't this. He mentions what it couldn't have been. He said it couldn't have been an aircraft that he's familiar with because there was no heat source. It couldn't have been an aircraft that he's familiar with because of the flight pattern. It couldn't be an aircraft that he was familiar with because there was no propulsion source. heat source, okay? Didn't say what it was. He said what it couldn't be. And that's how, in my opinion, that's how a true skeptic works. In other words, and I always like to use, it's funny because when I use this scenario, I always like to use a fictional character. I like to use Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's character, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes always said, if you want to find out the guilty party, you have to eliminate all the innocent, and who is left is guilty. That's kind of what you have to do if you're a skeptic. You have to eliminate sources. In other words, if they found out that the radar was faulty or the radar was false or the FLIR on Underwood's jet was not functional, if you could prove all that, then he may say, okay, the radar was faulty, the FLIR was faulty, so I believe that because these two are faulty, that maybe Fravor saw something that he really didn't see, okay? But you had 3 different sources, 3 different people, 3 different independent sources for this, okay? The other thing about Fravor, if he's a UFO stooge, like Nichols says, Fravor hasn't published a book, okay? He hasn't been on Coast to Coast. He's not trying to sell a television show. He's not made a dime off of this. He's granted interviews, and that's it. Why would he do that? Why, if he's not even trying to make money off of it, why would he open himself up to potential ridicule? Why would he do that if he was just lying? Again, maybe he's so stupid, maybe he's just a big dummy, and maybe these guys were snowing him all along. Maybe Day and Underwood and the U.S. Navy all conspired to make Fravor look like a dope. Maybe. Do you really think that's a possibility? I mean, anything's possible, but I can't see it being realistic. In other words, Nichol doesn't have an open mind when it comes to this. If he can't explain something away, he just dismisses the source as being silly, stupid, or mistaken. And that's what he's doing in this case. Well, Fravor's just a UFO stooge. He's just silly. He knows what he thinks he saw, but he just thinks he saw that. He really didn't see it. And he never addresses the radar, and he never addresses the FLIR camera video. Never. Never. And he never explains why the U.S. Navy backed up Fravor's statement. Now, to me, when you have somebody like Nichol who just dismisses all that and says, nope, this is definitely fake because I think this guy just made it up and these other guys conspired to make him look like a stooge. To me, that's no different from a guy who's on Coast to Coast saying every time you see something in the sky, it's a spacecraft from Pleiades. But then you decide for yourself. Is it real? It's a UFO, but what is it really? Is it an experimental aircraft? Was it an aircraft, maybe an experimental aircraft from a government that wasn't ours? Maybe it was Russian. Maybe it was Chinese. Just because it was off the coast of San Diego, maybe the government did know about it and they thought, we can't really say what that was because then now we're admitting that there was a Russian or Chinese aircraft in our waters or just off of our international waters. Maybe that's part of it too. It could be. But you decide for yourself. Now you have the facts. If you want more facts, investigate it more on your own. But now you have the facts. And you decide for yourself. What is the saga? What is the solution? What is the subject of the Tic Tac UFO saga? Well, that's it. I'm done. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. That's where you go to get the James Strong Show. And if you want to go ahead and see get the James Strong Show delivered to your mailbox, that's the easiest way to get it, really. Send me an email, JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's all one word, JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. You send me your email address. I will send you a link to the podcast upon publication so you can download it and listen to it at your leisure. iTunes, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Facebook, Twitter, TuneIn, Radio Online, the podcast app, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcast, CastBox, SoundCloud, Deezer, and as always, all podcasts for the James Strong Show can be reached at Spreaker.com. That's it. Have a good weekend. Have a good day. Until next time, this is James Strong saying, adios.